We are Rogue Media Sports.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
With the Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card, you can earn unlimited 2% cash rewards on purchases you want and purchases you need. That means you earn on what you want, like trying out that new workout class, and 2% cash rewards on what you need, like a foam roller for your sore muscles. That's the beauty of the Active Cash Credit Card. It's ready when you are, with unlimited 2% cash rewards. The Wells Fargo Active Cash Credit Card. That's real life ready. Terms apply. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/activecash.
It is Matt Mosley alongside my good buddy Ed Werder, and it's another episode of the Doomsday Podcast, an emergency edition. And we will look ahead to the game. But first, Ed, big news breaking out there in Sherman, Eastern District Court of Texas. And the big news coming down that from the NFL, that is, and Harold Henderson, that Zeke Elliott will be suspended. It will be upheld. Now, he will get to play, the NFL says, because it was sort of later in the week. We're taping this thing on Tuesday. Just got word that this happened a little earlier this evening, and so he will be playing in this game. And then we'll wait for Friday's ruling. Ed, you've been all over this. You've looked at this thing from every turn, and I'm pleased to say you have secured us a big-time guest tonight who's a legal scholar. I'm a little offended because I thought I was enough with my few semesters there at Baylor Law School. But Michael McCann, and so I think he'll be able to shed some light on this. Ed, briefly, your just initial thoughts when you saw this news coming down?
Well, I think that it's going to be difficult going forward for Ezekiel Elliott to get a reduction now that Harold Henderson, appointed by Roger Goodell as the appeals officer, has decided that Elliott should be suspended for 6 games as Goodell implemented the punishment for the alleged instances of domestic violence against Tiffany Thompson, his former girlfriend. If you read the case, you'll get a sense, and I think what we see with Henderson supporting Goodell's decision is they feel they have a very compelling case based on the evidence, regardless of how many holes Jeffrey Kessler and Heather McPhee, the lawyers for Elliott representing the NFLPA, attempted to punch in all of that, and did so with some level of success. But this is going to make it very hard, I think, for Zeke Elliott to win any kind of reduction, and I think he has to, in all likelihood, prepare himself for the very real possibility that he's going to be suspended for 6 games at some point in the near future, whether it's this season or next, depending on his ability to win an injunction in federal court.
A lot to get to today, including the esteemed lawyer, and he's the Sports Illustrated legal expert, Michael McCann. But before we do that, you talk about the experts in fantasy football. This is FanDuel. Fantasy football for everyday fans. New contests starting every week. No busted seasons. Something for everyone. Lots of contests to choose from. Starting at just $1. Just pick a contest, choose your team, and watch your score real time. Over 2.5 million players have won a cash prize playing fantasy sports on FanDuel. Here's what I want you to do. Sign up today. Go to FanDuel.com, click the Join Now button, and use my code DOOMSDAY. That's DOOMSDAY. Put that in the code. It's very important. New users get free entry into the NFL Sunday Million with over $1 million in cash prizes when you make your first deposit on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com and sign up with the promo code DOOMSDAY. That's FanDuel.com, promo code DOOMSDAY, DOOMSDAY, void where prohibited. Frito, play the music, please.
So our guest here on the Doomsday Podcast, on the night that Ezekiel Elliott's 6-game suspension is upheld by the appeals officer as appointed by Roger Goodell, Harold Henderson, we are fortunate to have Michael McCann. He's a legal analyst and writer for Sports Illustrated, one of their very many unique talents, the founding director of the Sports and Entertainment Law Institute at the University of New Hampshire School of Law, where he's also a tenured professor of law. This is a real legal scholar we have here on the Doomsday. You would think we could not afford such legal expertise. But fortunately, many years ago, and this is germane to the story as it turns out, I first met Michael when I was up in Minnesota for ESPN, and we were covering the negotiations on what is the current CBA, the 10-year deal that they're currently operating under, which is now part of the challenge for Ezekiel Elliott to get back on the football field.
If Michael had have told the NFLPA that they were signing a really bad deal, he could have saved some of
executive director
players. Yeah, a lot of trouble. I'm sure he didn't have to stand in front of that ship as much as you had to.
He was never in front of the Viking ship. He was He was safely indoors, out of the weather.
He's smart.
So anyway, we are fortunate that I had this interaction, that Michael has become the great star that he is in the media from a legal point of view, and he's here to interpret some of these important developments today for us. And I think the first one, Michael, is, for me, do you see this as having been Ezekiel Elliott's best chance to have his suspension reduced or overturned?
You know, I think it probably was. His best odds were with Harold Henderson because Henderson has a track record of reducing some suspensions. He did it in the past. He did it with certainly
Greg Hardy.
With Greg Hardy. And, you know, this is an arbitrator who I think is probably more fair, to be honest, than Goodell. Elliott was fortunate that Goodell didn't do the hearing. And also the fact is, going to court's really hard. The Article 46 of the collective bargaining agreement gives Roger Goodell so much discretion in deciding whether to punish a player. It's hard to ask a judge, despite this discretion, please tell Roger Goodell he got it wrong, which is what Elliott's now doing. It worked for Tom Brady to an extent. It got him a season of play, but that was a very different situation where Brady was suspended earlier in the year. Roger Goodell upheld the suspension in July, so about 6 weeks before the season started. Elliott doesn't have that kind of timetable, so it's even harder for him. So, yeah, and I think his best chance was with Harold Henderson.
Is this like Brady in the sense that now that it goes into the courts and already is in the courts, there'll be a ruling on Friday, but is it the same in the sense that this isn't going to determine Elliott's innocence or guilt in the accusation of domestic violence? This is strictly a process question now, right? Did the NFL follow a reasonable process in reaching this conclusion? And is it fair to Ezekiel Elliott?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're never going to find out whether he's guilty of the underlying acts. We know that he wasn't charged with a crime, though that doesn't mean he didn't do it, but that's certainly a favorable factor for him. But that's not the test for the NFL. The NFL can apply a much lower threshold. It's really whatever Roger Goodell thinks is detrimental to the NFL, and the judge isn't going to question that. That's not the judge's call. It's not appropriate for the judge to look into that. We're not going to hear from the accuser. We're not going to hear about the evidence. We're going to hear if Roger Goodell followed Article 46, and the fact is Article 46 doesn't require much of Roger Goodell, so that's a factor that favors him.
But like the Tom Brady case that we keep sort of pointing to, he was able to play that full season. It has been pointed to that there were more discrepancies, or, you know, there were things that happened and were handled more poorly perhaps by the NFL in this case than even in the Brady case. Now, putting your legal mind to work and trying to prognosticate and look at how this is going to happen, much like Brady, would you put your money on Zeke Elliott playing all 16 regular season games this year and into the playoffs?
I wouldn't, and part of it is because of Tom Brady. The fact is, Elliott's case is harder because Brady lost. And this is a challenge that Brady didn't experience. Elliott has to go up against the Federal Circuit, Second Circuit federal opinion in the Brady case, which clearly made it apparent that Roger Goodell has very wide latitude and that unless players collectively bargain certain process rights, they don't exist. Now, that decision is in a different federal jurisdiction, but it's still persuasive authority here in Elliott's case. So I think in a way Elliott has a harder mountain to climb because of Tom Brady's case. Plus, Roger Goodell made himself more of a target in Brady's case because he served as fact finder, punisher, and arbitrator. Obviously, he didn't do that here. He had Harold Henderson involved. And plus, Goodell used outside experts, the 4 experts that were consulted. Again, it lends credibility to Roger Goodell's decision-making, even though clearly there are problems in this case, right? There are problems with how Goodell got information. As Peter King wrote, why didn't Roger Goodell ask to talk to those who had better knowledge of what happened? So Goodell looks far from perfect.
Kia Roberts,
but
the lead investigator who interviewed
like Kia Roberts,
the alleged victim, Tiffany Thompson, 6 times.
6 times. Why wouldn't Roger Goodell want to talk with her? It's almost head-scratching. But then the question is, okay, so Goodell should have done that, but was he required to do that? And that's the problem for Elliott.
Yeah, and it is Michael McCann from Sports Illustrated and tenured law professor. Man, that must be nice, Michael, when you get that tenure behind you. And there's really, unless you just really, really screw it up, you're just there for a long, long time. And I by the way, I went to law school myself, did not quite make it all the way through. But interestingly, perhaps to you, Judge Mazant and I did go to the same law school. And in this case, at Baylor Law School. And I want to ask you this. Yes, that's where I went for a few semesters. We called it quarters there. But when you have the jurisdiction, and he's going to rule on this by Friday, the NFL is obviously saying, hey, let's get this thing into New York. How often do you see the venue like this play a role in, okay, the judge is down there in Cowboys country? When you sort of have looked at this judge's credentials, as you do as being a legal scholar, where have you seen him tend to come down, and how would you, if you were going to try to look at his past, what would you see happening?
Well, he is in Texas, and he has ties to the state. But on the other hand, he's obviously, as you know, Matt, he's a federal judge, so he has lifetime tenure, and he doesn't have to worry about, at least in theory, being popular, unlike, say, a state judge whose ability to be reelected could come into play. So I think he'll safely insulate himself from that sort of is he popular or not dynamic, and I think he'll make a decision that he thinks is right. From what I have heard about him, he is very smart. That's one description that's used, including in a patent case, that this is someone who asks hard questions, very thoughtful. I don't know what he's going to decide, but I think it will be based on a well-reasoned, logical view. Some people will like it, some people won't, but my guess is that it will be a pretty smart decision.
What is at stake in your mind on Friday with the judge's decision?
Well, I think obviously one big issue is going to be if he rules for Elliott, that would then enjoin the NFL from imposing the suspension. So Elliott would be able to play really indefinitely until there's a further hearing and decision on the merits of the case, and that's at a minimum weeks, possibly longer. Now, it may not turn out that way because the NFL could appeal Judge Mazant's decision, or Elliott could appeal it if it goes against him. So there will likely be interaction with the federal appeals court that could delay things further. It's certainly not going to end on Friday. That's for sure. And the NFL could also seek to move the hearing to New York. I mean, there are a lot of variables here that suggest it could take a while to play out. But if the NFL wins on Friday, it's going to be really hard for Elliott to overcome that. There will be filings. There will be press releases from the NFLPA. There'll be some media who latch onto them and say, oh, look, he's going to win now. But the reality is that if Elliott loses on Friday, it's not over for him, but it's pretty close to being over.
But you think he faces long odds anyway, regardless of what happens Friday?
Yeah, it's really hard to show that he meets the 4 requirements for a temporary restraining order. It's why temporary restraining orders are considered extraordinary forms of relief, particularly in arbitration matters.
What are those?
Where
can you just remind the audience what those are?
Sure. So one is that there's a high likelihood of success, that if there's a further hearing, trial, that a court would look at whether or not Elliott would probably win, that he'd have a substantial likelihood of success. I don't think he has that based on what we know about players taking on the NFL and suspensions. The fact is they usually fail because of the discretion given to arbitrators. Then he has to show that there is immediate and irreparable harm that for which there's no adequate remedy at law. Basically, that means he has to show that unless he gets a temporary restraining order, he's going to be harmed in ways that no money damages will ever make him whole again. Because the NFL is going to say, oh, that's not true. If later on you win, we'll just pay you back what you lost plus interest. He has to show more than that. It's going to hurt his career as a player, and he'll never be able to get that back. That's not an easy argument to make when it's clear that players are punished by monetary ways. Then he has to show that the greater injury will result from denying the temporary restraining order than from it being granted. Basically, he has to tell the judge, look, I'm way worse off unless you grant this than the NFL will be. Well, the NFL is going to say that's not true, because if the judge grants a temporary restraining order, then the judge is really rewriting the CBA. And that CBA is based on all sorts of promises and assumptions and trade-offs that each side made. Now the judge is going to come in and give players some new right that they didn't collectively bargain. That could diminish the certainty of the CBA. And then lastly, he has to show that a temporary restraining order would not disfavor the public interest. That's sort of kind of a loose one as to what that is. He's going to argue that it's about justice if he doesn't get it. The NFL, in its brief, said it's not about justice. Look at the police report. If you really want justice, you should make yourself into a better person.
Wow, there is a lot, and I so much appreciate you going over all of that. Let me ask you this, Michael, and it's Michael McCann joining us on the Doomsday Podcast that we do weekly, sort of an emergency podcast tonight with everything going on in Sherman. A lot of talk has been about what's this going to do to his future, his endorsements, all of these kinds of things. When his legal team and the NFLPA, everybody involved, decided to go ahead and attach so much of this testimony, and there's a lot of details in there. Some would say salacious, whatever you want to call it. There's stuff about an abortion that the accuser had, that he encouraged her to have. I mean, why would you put all this stuff that makes your client look bad, especially the drug use, all of this? Why would you attach all this? Is it so the whole record will be there for the judge? Walk us through that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and there's definitely a risk to that there's a lot of stuff in there that's not going to reflect well on him, that's inherently controversial, that distracts fans from their interest in him as a player into questioning some certain aspects of his personal life. And that's, of course, going to hurt his capacity to get endorsement deals, because the last thing companies want are individuals to endorse products who people question their morals and their judgment and their ethics. I think the tactic there is that, as questionable or bad as some of that stuff is, it creates the record that there are real questions about the accuser's story. And that might lead people to think, we don't know who to believe. And that raises questions, right? I mean, so if you're not from Texas, if you're from some random part of the country and you've been following this story, you're thinking, I don't know what happened. And that's actually maybe not such a bad thing for Ezekiel Elliott. If people are thinking, who knows what really happened? It was some complicated legal proceeding. Goodell didn't listen to the one person who spoke to the accuser. It's just this muddled situation, and the muddled aspect of it might actually help Elliott, because when people are going to think back to this, they may not think about the accusations. They may think about the process was screwy.
How significant do you think it is that Goodell did not have Kia Roberts, as we've mentioned? She interviewed Tiffany Thompson, the alleged victim, 6 different times, was the only one from the NFL to ever have direct contact with her, that he did not have her in the room when they made their final decision about discipline. The NFLPA obviously alleging a conspiracy to find guilt where there was none. How significant is that one piece of all of this?
I think it's significant from a public relations standpoint because it discredits the NFL. That why would you not speak to the one person who spoke to the accuser and who did so 6 times when no one else had spoken with her? I mean, it's literally a head-scratching fact that raises questions about the credibility of what the NFL did. So from that vantage point, I think it's significant. Legally, I don't think it's that significant. And I say that because at the end of the day, Roger Goodell decides what the punishment is. And there's nothing in the collective bargaining agreement that requires him to speak with investigators who spoke with the accuser. I mean, it's one of those rules that should be there. You know, common sense says it should be there, but you read it, it's not there. And that is the problem for Elliott and the NFLPA, is that they're arguing for process rights that aren't actually stated in the CBA.
Michael, my last question for you is this. It's not unprecedented that a player would be allowed to play a game and then be suspended because, in effect, that's what happened with the player we spoke about before, Greg Hardy. He played the week 1 and then went on the commissioner's exempt list for the rest of the season. Why do you think the NFL had the suspension upheld and without an injunction being won by Elliott and the Players Association has agreed to allow him to play week 1?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ed, and there's no obvious answer to it. I think one possible reason is that the NFL, in light of the fact that there may be additional court hearings, additional judges perhaps that review this record, that they want to look fair. They want to look like they're being pragmatic. They know that Henderson didn't issue an opinion before this hearing, and that possibly that disadvantages Elliott in some way. It might disadvantage the Cowboys because they're not sure if he's going to be available. And there's the issue of competitive balance with the fact that it's the first game of the season. It's against the Giants. I mean, those are factors that suggest the NFL is trying to be fair. That's one reason, and the NFL may be thinking that it's good to appear that way when this case could go on for a while. So I think that may be what the NFL is thinking, but it is unusual for a league that normally doesn't cut breaks, if you will, for players who are suspended. It's certainly a little bit surprising.
I'll say this. Harold Henderson, a guy that Ed, I think, would recognize in a public place. They were both Ed Werder and Harold Henderson were both at Jerry's party. And you have to wonder if in the back of Harold's mind, as he's going through all this and deciding, do I lower this thing? What do I do with this? Do I uphold it? If he thought, well, gosh, I was over there partying with Jerry, this is going to look really bad if I lower this thing to 4 games. I mean, there's so many different facets to this thing, as there was with Brady. Last thing I'll ask, and Michael, is why do you think Roger Goodell is so awful at this?
So I think one reason, and I'm biased, but he's not a lawyer. And the other commissioners are all lawyers. And his predecessor was a lawyer. I think as a lawyer, you care a lot about process. You care about transparency. You care about consistency. These are virtues that I don't think are at the top of his list. I think at the top of his list would be profits, and he's good at that, right? The NFL has made a lot of money under his watch. Order, discipline, structure. He seems to be pretty good at that too, by and large. So he has certain attributes that might be really good for a sports league, but I don't think he views these situations from the lens of someone who is really well equipped to handle them. And then coupled with the fact that the collective bargaining agreement gives him too much power. In a way, Article 46 is seen as something bad for players, but I actually think it's bad for Goodell. I don't think he should be in this role. I think the worst thing for him is that he gets caught up in these player disciplinary matters where he's clearly not good at them. And he doesn't think like a judge. He doesn't think like a lawyer. It's not his fault. He doesn't have that training. But he shouldn't be in that position. If he could focus on the business of the NFL, we would probably regard him as a great commissioner. But instead, his legacy is going to be tainted by his role in a subject area in which he has no expertise and he doesn't appear to be particularly skilled.
But the NFL has no shortage of lawyers and no shortage of money to hire lawyers. So while your point's well taken, it's really not a valid excuse, it doesn't seem like, in a situation like this.
But he's the monster.
Well,
he's the guy at the center of everything.
Remember that I'm here to take back the game from the players. And that led to Bountygate and Deflategate. And now Ezekiel.
No, I am totally with Michael. They need a lawyer in there, and I've been so inspired by this conversation. I'm going to go finish my law degree.
How long will that take?
Yes. Come on up to UNH.
Can you get me in?
Excellent food.
Sure.
I made a B in crim law and maybe contract. Struggled in Civ Pro. Struggled a little bit with torts, but I think we could. Some of my hours might hold up. That was like 20 years ago, but we'll see.
I like it.
We'll see. Michael, thank you. That was great, and we really appreciate you shedding some light on this, and I think our listeners will really benefit from this. And Ed, you continue to interact with Ed on Twitter. Yeah, that'll be good.
Not
And
as active as I am.
Follow me at Matt Mosley. I'm more. I don't tweet as much as Ed, but you'll like some of my stuff.
Michael, thanks so much for your expertise and analysis. We appreciate it.
Hey, anytime. Thanks you guys for having me on.
See you, Michael. Thanks a lot.
Yep,
bye-bye. Well, we appreciate Michael McCann from the University of New Hampshire Law School, tenured professor there, friend of Ed Werder's. They got to know each other during a CBA battle, CBA discussion back in the day in Minnesota. Ed has so many friends. And Michael McCann, another one. And I thought he gave us some good stuff. Ed, our friends and our new sponsors at FanDuel. I mean, here we go. I mean, we have sponsorship. That, to me, that means something is working. Folks are excited, and I'm excited about FanDuel for a lot of reasons. Fantasy football fans, the wait is nearly over. Football's back, which means FanDuel is back. Over 2.5 million players have won a cash prize playing fantasy sports on FanDuel. Sign up today. Go to FanDuel.com, click the Join Now button. I mean, Ed, I think you could figure this out. And use our code Doomsday, DOOMSDAY. New users get free entry into the NFL Sunday Million with over $1 million in cash prizes when you make your first deposit on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com and sign up with the promo code Doomsday. That's FanDuel.com, the promo code Doomsday. Void where prohibited. Ed, we're doing a sort of an emergency podcast tonight with the news coming down that Harold Henderson, who basically was appointed to arbitrate the hearing on behalf of the NFL, and he heard everything for about, 3 days. This thing went longer than most of these do. And he came down with his ruling, and interesting, while folks were in Sherman for this temporary restraining order, trying to get an injunction, the NFL and NFLPA were fighting it out, and then one of the attorneys says, well, here it comes.
Jeff Kessler.
Kessler, on the NFLPA side, says, there's been a ruling. The NFL has decided, or Harold Henderson has decided, to uphold the NFL's ruling, which is a 6 games. But the NFL has now said it's late enough in the week or late enough in the hour on Tuesday to go ahead. And I know, Ed, we won't get into that right now. That was a little bit of a point of contention we were asking Michael McCann about. It's an unwritten rule that you're supposed to give teams the news by Tuesday. Well, that's a lot of times with fines and all that kind of stuff. This was a different situation, but the NFL has allowed Zeke. So here they are, Ed. NBC Sunday Night Football. Excitement. He's going to play. He's going to be there for this, and then there's still a really good chance he won't play then for 6 games after this. And so, the Cowboys, by the way, if they got a ruling, let's say Friday, They could decide to go ahead and start the suspension and get it over with sooner. They could do that. But from what will likely happen is they're going to spend this week getting him ready to play, and then he's going to go out and they're going to try to get a win over the Giants.
Well, and I think one of the things that Harold Henderson's ruling, his decision to uphold Roger Goodell's 6-game suspension of Ezekiel Elliott for alleged incidents of domestic violence, I think it points out, and some people are going to say, well, of course he did because, he's on the management council, he works in the league office, so forth and so on, and that's a fair point to make. But I think the overarching point here, and I've tried to make this throughout the day, is that the NFL believes that despite its process errors, which are now evident and have been much discussed, despite all of that, they feel like they have a very good case based on evidence. Now, I've seen 200 pages, including some of the photographic exhibits in this case that I don't think many people have witnessed. And I'm just going to tell you, without divulging how I got it, where it came from, that it's more than a he said, she said case. And the NFL's well aware of the credibility issues that they have on both sides, both with Ezekiel Elliott and with Tiffany Thompson. Here's two things I would like people to understand and take away from this that they may not know. And they'll probably disagree with it if they're Cowboy fans, but the reality is that during the time that these alleged incidents happened, Tiffany Thompson was photographing the injuries, and she was texting her mother in some cases and an aunt to whom she is very close in others these pictures. And one of them was tagged abusive. So this is not something that she put together 5 or 6 months later because she later said she wanted to ruin his career. She was documenting this as it happened. Now, you can, I guess, argue, as the NFLPA did in the appeal, that you can't credibly determine that when these photographs were actually taken and when the injuries were actually suffered. But she was documenting this. So it's more than, like I said, his testimony against her word. And I think the other interesting thing is that people probably don't know is Ezekiel Elliott was not entirely cooperative in the situation. Part of the reason this went for 13 months was because he did not provide evidence that the NFL requested, including complete phone records, including complete text messages. He would include, as I understand it, parts of threads of interactions between he and her, much of which they redacted before they submitted it. So there's a lot more evidence than people recognize, is what my point is.
Yeah, and
I'm not saying he did it or he didn't do it. I'm just saying that the NFL feels really strong about its case from an evidence standpoint for those reasons.
But now the other part is they have lost so much credibility, and they continue to because they botch these things. And as I think you would admit, and you have even stated, they just look like fools in some of these instances, and especially this with Kia Roberts, someone who was the one person talking to Tiffany Thompson. And then even from just an optic standpoint, even if her feelings were represented in an appropriate manner, the fact that she wasn't in there just looks bad. It just looks bad. I mean, it's what, if I'm with the NFLPA and I'm trying to present this case, that's what I'm doing. Now, what doesn't resonate with me is this point they've made about he was not able to efface his accuser. Well, they don't have subpoena power, and, to me, that never, so we think that would have, really helped everybody in this case to have her in that room. Oh, let's let Zeke ask her some stuff. The person who's alleging him that he's made all these injuries and everything, we're going to put her in a room with him? That never resonates with me.
Isn't that what Roger Goodell was criticized for when he had the hearing to determine
she testified
the punishment with Ray Rice?
Exactly.
Was that Janae Rice, the victim, was in the room at the time.
And I think at the time, and that played a huge role in why Lisa Frill and so many of these people have been hired, is because he botched that one beyond belief, and he didn't have a great understanding of domestic violence at that time, and that accusers or people that are being abused do stay with the people that are abusing them. It happens, and that doesn't mean they're like, why did they do that? Why didn't they leave? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and it's not fair to go, well, they should have just left. And so, in that instance, Janae Rice, I mean, she's in there sort of saying he's been he's a good person, he's a good person, so bad moment and all that stuff. That that I think the commissioner sort of learned from that, but he didn't learn enough. Now, I still think Judge Mazant, who, by the way, went to the same law school I did, Ed, Baylor Law School.
But he graduated?
I think he did finish. Okay. He was there about 6 years before I was there. Judge Mazant, a little bit older than I am. Good guy, seems like. Went to Pitt undergrad, Baylor Law School. He's in Sherman. Michael McCann, who told us, the Sports Illustrated expert, this guy's known as extremely smart, knows all the issues, has been really good on some patent cases. And so, but he zeroed in on the NFL, what the NFLPA was pointing out about why was Kia Roberts. So it did sound like that was a large part of what he was. Now, that doesn't mean a lot of judges will ask a ton of questions, and that doesn't mean that, they're going to rule one way or the other because of that. I thought it was interesting in talking to Michael McCann, and it sounds like you've talked to others today that have made you sort of feel like this. He thinks it is more of a long shot than what happened with Tom Brady for Zeke. Some people have said, hey, Zeke's case may be more favorable because of some of these issues that the NFLPA brought up. Michael McCann seems to think we didn't make him do like a 50-50, 60-40. Just hearing him talk, I would say he's going to be a little surprised if the injunction is granted and effectively Zeke is able to play out the season, much like what happened with Tom Brady.
Well, and he thinks that. And he didn't go into great detail, but as he pointed out in his Twitter analysis today, in the motion to dismiss that the NFL filed in Sherman in response to the NFLPA's lawsuit, they mentioned Tom Brady's name 6 or 7 times because they won that case under the Article 46 that he talked about in the CBA, which grants Goodell in the CBA these vast powers of discipline that he can effectively do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to even have a factual basis necessarily for it. Now, I think that he's morally obligated to conduct a fair and thorough investigation and come to a just and reasonable conclusion and punish based on that. So the NFLPA is obviously arguing that's far from what happened here, that this was a conspiracy, that basically they had determined the outcome and worked backwards, which is kind of the same thing Jonathan Vilma and some of the Saints players accused the league of. And if you remember, Paul Tagliabue, the former commissioner, who is a lawyer, had to come in and make the final determination on that very late in the game, and he brokered a deal between the players and Goodell. But and then the point you made about all of this negative information that has come out about Ezekiel Elliott based on this filing, that he allegedly used cocaine, that he parties late into the night, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, that he's driven drunk, that he still uses various illegal substances. I think that all points out that regardless of what happens here and whether he is or isn't suspended for 6 or fewer games, that the Cowboys have to deal with this issue, or it's inevitable that he's going to put himself in jeopardy of losing his ability to be on the football field for them in the future.
I think I think you're right on that, and I think it points to you can become so enamored with a guy in the build-up to the draft that you only hear what you want to hear. And I have to think now, some of this testimony that you're referring to and some of the stuff I've read indicates some of this was going on when he was still at Ohio State.
Well, you remember at Ohio State that he and Joey Bosa were roommates, but they were broken up, that Bosa left because he didn't think it was in his best interest to remain Zeke Elliott's roommate.
But again, when the Cowboys were making this choice, and to them so far, now this is a lot to go through and for everybody involved, but he had like an unbelievable rookie season, and he's
a great player.
He is a great player. But I think what it comes back to is he had a strong family, had a strong parents, and I literally I think the Cowboys heard what they wanted to hear, and that some of these disturbing things that he was getting involved with, they kept coming back to.
Wow.
This guy has so much strong foundation, and we can get him over some of this stuff he's been a part of.
There's a documented history that Jerry Jones and the Cowboys are willing to take risk on character because in cases where they think that they're either so desperate for that level of talent, like in a Greg Hardy situation or a Pac-Man Jones situation.
But not usually this early in the draft, though. Not this high of a draft pick. We've never seen them. And at the time,
Quincy
we
Carter
didn't know what
was
kind.
a second-round pick, but a quarterback.
That was utter craziness. It turned out to be. But people thought that at the time. They said this is a reach, and the guy might have gone in the fourth round. It was Jerry listening to Jim Donnan, who was the Georgia coach, at the time. And saying,
but I'm just saying that the Cowboys, through Jerry, in the last 25 years, have been predisposed to having more of a willingness because the owner's the general manager, and he's a wildcatter, and he's willing to take risk to acquire greatness that might otherwise not be available to him, and that's to some degree what he did here. They wanted to build their whole team around this player. Like I said in answering the Facebook question, they built their offense around this player. Their quarterback's highly dependent on this player, and their defense is largely dependent on this player establishing time of possession advantages and minimizing the number of snaps they have to play. And there's obviously a risk that comes with that. Now you hope that he's always been great to us, and he's the life of the locker room. There's no question about it. He has a charisma and a charm. He's very popular among his teammates. He's a great player. But this kind of stuff just can't be part of the equation going forward. And you even heard Darren Woodson when we interviewed him at training camp saying, hey, if this is going to happen on a continual basis, then you just have to go a different direction. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was really shocking to me that early in a player's career, Darren Woodson, the leading tackler in franchise history and a Ring of Honor member who won Super Bowl rings, is saying, hey, this guy is a great young player, but if this is going to continue to be an issue for the rest of his career, then you've got to move on.
Yeah, but back to your point about Jerry and his willingness to take all these risks, there's something here that Jerry has gone so all in on Zeke's behalf for whatever reason, maybe because he knew NFLPA was going to bring some of this stuff up, but this is part of his enabling, in a sense, because what the message to this player could be, this is a huge distraction to my team. I can't keep doing things like this. I can't keep bringing this on the team. But he's also hearing the message, as long as I'm an incredible player, pretty much everybody in this organization will have my back.
Matt, this guy, Jerry Jones, was one of maybe 2 or 3 owners who would have signed Greg Hardy under the circumstances, which were domestic violence, and not only put him in their uniform and play him in games, but to call him a leader after he had a confrontation on the sideline, a physical confrontation on the sideline with a coach in one of his very first games. I mean, that goes to exactly what you're talking about. And I don't totally blame this on Jerry. Because ultimately it's the player's responsibility to behave in an appropriate manner. And it doesn't matter, as we've said before, what the player's age is. Yeah, he's a young player. Well, Jason Witten was 20 when he came here, and he never had these issues. And I remember talking to DeMarco Murray when Zeke was drafted. And I said to Murray, I said, what advice did you give Zeke? You know all the players, you know the offense, the whole deal. He said, I told him one thing. I said, put yourself next to number 82, Jason Witten. Whatever he does, do. Whatever he says, say. I don't think that's what's happened here.
No, I don't. But I tell you that what has muddied the waters is the NFL has lost so much credibility, and people have lost so much trust in them that it's hard for any ruling to hold up. It's going to be, if it's upheld or the temporary restraining order is denied, and that's going to come out, by the way, for folks on Friday at, I believe, is it 4 or 5 o'clock? I think it's 4 Central Time. The Judge Mazant down there in Sherman will grant that ruling, and so what a scene, by the way! And all the reporters
Zeke did show up
today
in his suit and tie, and so he was
obviously
making the statement that this is very important to him, and he's taking it seriously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as he should, and there's a lot at stake for him, and I think at some point it's got to dawn on him. In addition to all the money I'm hoping to earn from the Cowboys and the NFL in my future, I'd like to do a few of these endorsements. And as long as all this stuff's out there, the people who might be thinking of, people aren't going to stop wearing Zeke Elliott jerseys. I don't think at this point. And maybe that's some kind of sad statement. Right. I don't know. But I'm just saying from an endorsement, people out there are making judgments on, do we want to do business with someone like this?
Well, that's the point that Jason Garrett made when he spoke to Peter King during training camp, right? He said that, and this is an acknowledgement, by the way, that they don't agree with his behavior, and they know it's an issue because Jason Garrett has gone to Zeke Elliott, according to what Peter King wrote, quoting Jason Garrett, and said, look, you can be the LeBron James of football when it comes to endorsements, or you can be a guy who makes $1 million off the field. But right now, companies like AT&T want to sponsor an athlete and want to have a spokesman, and they're going to hire Jordan Spieth or they're going to hire Dak Prescott. They're not going to hire Zeke Elliott. Yeah. And so we have to see if that ever resonates.
It's a great point. While I think these companies like AT&T are waiting to see kind of what all becomes of this, we'd like to invite you to sponsor the Doomsday Podcast.
With a couple of high-character people.
High-character players. There's really... We are... Now, I'm not saying this comes across in the podcast, but our personal lives are boring enough that there's really, I hate to say this. Sounds like I'm about to say something like Gary Hart once said. But there's really...
Has he boarded the monkey business?
A political reference.
Was it the monkey business that he boarded?
I think so. Yeah, come follow me or whatever he reportedly said at the time. And they did, and Gary Hart's political career ended. These days, he would have been fine.
Yeah.
Trump's been able to survive some of these things. Now, Ed, there is a game happening Sunday night, and it does. We know now that Zeke will be eligible to play in this game, and let's talk a little bit about it as we get closer to it. Taping this, of course, Tuesday evening, and so you'll be hearing this tomorrow morning, even maybe midnight tonight. If you're like me, you like to stay up late and jump on things right when they hit. I was talking. I wanted to point this out to you because this player that I'm going to mention, this former player, said he loved you today. He said, "I love Ed Werder."
I can't imagine. That narrows a list of hundreds of thousands.
I'm talking about none other than Justin Tuck, who has become part of our whole podcasting family.
Am I part of the entire empire or just this one show?
No, we're all one. We're all one, and he is now part of what we call Tuck Rules. The Tuck Rules.
Catchy name.
Yeah. And what's funny is I didn't really think about. I mean, I know where the Tuck Rule came from, but I thought it's kind of a fun name. It works on a couple of different levels. And what was really funny today, he announced it. I told Justin, I said, put it out there, and the Raiders fans were upset. And you understand that, but it's double so for Tuck because he ended his career there,
right? And
so it was kind of funny. But in talking to him, now he believes that the Giants. He always thought, and Landon Collins has been quoted this week saying, "I want the Cowboys at full strength. And I asked Justin that very question: is that really? Are the Giants sitting there saying they want him to play, or are they saying, I hope he gets ruled out and we now know he's going to play? And he said, literally, what the Giants hated, especially with a rival like this, is any thought where they won and the Cowboys fans would be able to walk away saying, yeah, but Zeke didn't play, didn't really count, one of those things. And so much like what Landon Collins said, the fine safety for the Giants, we want him out there. And then Ben McAdoo, did you see the head coach? That statement he made, which was something along the lines, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but something along the lines of...
If they don't have anywhere to run, they're all the same.
Talking about running backs.
Right.
Yes, and interesting, because I would think you wouldn't want to challenge perhaps the best offensive line. They're already going to go out there, but, you don't want to give them too much bulletin board material. But, Ed, as we're getting closer to finally getting this NFL season started, do you see this Zeke thing as something that has caused so much of a distraction that could almost carry into the game? Or do you think this is something, as strange as it sounds with what all is swirling out there, that the team could almost rally around? He's back, at least for one game. We have our Zeke.
Right. If he's going to miss the next 6 games, starting with the Denver game, then you really got to win this first game, right, with him? Because you can't afford to go 0-7 or whatever You can't afford to lose a game with him when you're facing the next 6 games possibly without him. And, as you know, the best mindset that any NFL coach can ever create is it's us against the world. We're being unfairly victimized. I mean, look what the Patriots turned that into, with the Tom Brady suspension. Look what happened with them last year. That's what they did. They were motivated by losing their best player for 4 games in a situation that they felt was completely unfair and unjust. And that's exactly the mindset that the Cowboys will try to adapt and expect that they will. Are they going to win? What did they go? The Patriots went 3-1 without 3-1, I think, without Tom Brady.
Correct.
Can the Cowboys go 4-2 without Zeke Elliott if he misses all 6 games? I don't know. Their schedule's pretty challenging early on, and like I said, he's the most important player on their roster, both offensively and defensively. And the other thing is, starting the season with the Giants, the only team to beat them twice last year when Zeke and Dak had these incredible historic rookie seasons, points out something that I think the Cowboys believe that the Giants are built to play them. They have these 2 great defensive ends in Olivier Vernon and JPP who play the run exceptionally well. They're not just pass rushers. And I know in talking to some of the Giants coaches that their expectation if Zeke plays is they're going to try to attack the edges because Damon Harrison, Snacks Harrison, has proven that he's one of the few players who can occasionally win a matchup with some regularity against Travis Frederick. And don't forget, by the way, that the Cowboys are going to have a new left guard. It's not going to be Lael Collins or Ron Leary. It's going to be either Jonathan Cooper or, they hope, Chaz Green. So there's that advantage I think that the Giants are going to have. And I think the Giants' liability is their inability to protect Eli Manning and run the football. So they're going to have to throw the football, which Eli Manning has done quite well, and the Cowboys are young in the secondary. We don't know how much of a pass rush they're going to be able to generate in this game. But, man, Eli Manning, I don't know he's ever had a better group of receivers than he has, especially if Odell Beckham Jr. plays. And Brandon Marshall's okay with the shoulder. They've got, the rookie tight end Ingram. They've got Sterling Shepard. They are built to really challenge the Cowboys again this year.
You'll like to know, Tuck gave us a prediction. He said, could he go over 100%? And he actually, and I'm talking about whether Beckham Jr. was going to play. And they're friends, by the way. I'm trying to think if they ever overlap there. I
doubt it.
But Obi, they run in the same circles and all that kind of thing. And he said it's 99.9% that Odell Beckham Jr. is going to play. And he went through, not so much that he talked to all the medical people or anything like that. He just went through all the scenarios with everything that's on the line, with the Giants and the Cowboys. He was just like, there is no way in the world he's not going to play. Now, what the Giants have been asked is something we've kept bringing up with Jalen Smith. I know it's a whole different situation, but would they put him out there at 80%? And McAdoo basically said, really, I'm going to hear it from the doctors, and if he's cleared, he's going to play. And I just have a hard time thinking he's not going to be cleared, and you are so right. This secondary, which is kind of hit or miss, I mean, we've even seen it in the preseason. Jeff Heath taking on a starting role was nice in sort of a reserve role. Can he step in there for Barry Church? Byron Jones, heck of an athlete, but that's a lot to ask for him to suddenly sort of be the guy in charge back there in his second year. Second year in the league. And then you look at the corners. Anthony Brown's around, Orlando Scandrick. You're looking at me crazy. Is his third year?
I think it's third year, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll go to the tape later. He hasn't been around long yet. But yeah, this is a ton of pressure to put on a defense when you have Brandon Marshall, who's given this defense fits in the past. Poor Brandon Carr. I think he wanted out of Dallas mainly because he's just like, if I ever have to see Marshall again, much less twice a year, get me out of here, is gone. Claiborne's had some trouble in the past. This is going to be, and one guy I had mentioned, Shepard's in there, of course, with OBJ, and this new guy, Ingram, is highly intriguing to me because they think he's big enough to hold up blocking. In fact, he may be better than a couple of their starting tackles at blocking. This is going to be a struggle for them, as you pointed out. Ingram could be scary. to deal with because he to me is like a Jordan Reed from the Redskins. Certainly not Gronk-like. He's pretty big, but I do think he has speed. And the tight end position in the NFL rarely sees someone in that 4.3, 4.4 range, and he's got it.
From Ole Miss, their first-round pick, I think like 16th overall or something like that. And that's a position where they just didn't have a lot of speed and athleticism in the past. Donnell gave them, a couple of good games here and there, but this is a guy who's going to develop and should develop into an elite player at a position where it's tough to match up with those guys. I mean, no, that's what the Patriots try to do, right, with their running backs and tight ends. Is nobody spend this is what Bill Polian once pointed out in the green room. Look, nobody on defense spends any money on their linebackers, and they don't spend the money on their safeties. And those are the people that Belichick's exploiting with their offense. That he and Josh McDaniels are exploiting with the Patriots offense because all the balls go to the tight ends and to the slot receivers and to the running backs. They're not really challenging the corners who make money, and they're not holding the ball long enough for the pass rushers to be a big factor in it. And so all the money you spend on defense is kind of wasted because they're attacking all the cheap guys.
Exactly. And wish you wouldn't bring up Bill Polian. Don't care.
I love Bill Polian.
Don't care for
He's
the
a
man.
Good friend. He's an excellent analyst.
Don't care for the man. A little bit of a blowhard and takes credit.
Wears a gold jacket.
He doesn't. Does he ever wear that in the green room? Does he ever show up?
Feels as
No,
good
they
as it
have
gets.
good snacks in the ESPN
They don't have
green
anything.
room. Is there anything in there
there's
that's
nothing.
worth anything? Why did the
I hope that
Giants?
doesn't void my contract.
By the way, I meant to get him on this week, although there's nothing that could do that. You're just too good to lose. But Jerry Reese is a good friend of mine. Their GM. I should have thought to have him on. But one thing he can't do, he hasn't been able to do, is something you brought up. They have not been able to build an offensive line ever since Snee and some of those other guys. Who was their center for so long? Snee played, I think, right guard. But they had some nice, guys that had been there for a while. And
Well, that was under Tom Coughlin, obviously. And,
yes,
and
but even under
built that kind of team.
But
Coughlin
even under
started with the run
Coughlin,
game.
this thing has. I mean, you're sitting there all these years later trying to get by with Weston Richburg, this Eric Flowers they took in the first round.
Which
has
he appears to be the
not-
biggest liability that there
he
is
has
out there.
not worked out at all. And the Giants, I want you to name the last premier type running back the Giants had.
Tiki Barber.
You're about right. I liked Brandon Jacobs. He was more of a battering ram, and then
For a year or so.
And then Ahmad Bradshaw did some nice things for them. Outside of that, they have just not been able to find a running back in quite a few years. It's been 10 years, by the way, since that first Super Bowl run they had. They've had other Super Bowl runs, but you know what I mean with some of that group. That was Strahan's sort of last one, and they just haven't been able to get anything. So. If they do it, it's going to be all with that explosive. And he'll throw you the ball. Now, you got to catch it. You got to have somebody back there. The Cowboys aren't known for their takeaways.
He's going to have to get it out quick, even against the Cowboys, who don't appear to have an elite rusher. I do think that they have a lot of pretty good guys, and they're going to be able to rotate, a lot of people in, which is, Rod Marinelli's trademark. And as bad as the Giants' offensive line has appeared, they could actually be fairly effective in this particular game. I don't know that over time they're not going to be exposed, but against this particular opponent, I think they could be formidable.
And let's keep our eye on a guy I've brought up, and then, of course, you slapped me around. You said that Zach, the Cowboys' decorated offensive lineman had beaten me to the punch on this. And
Zach Martin?
Zach Martin. I'm talking about the great Malik Collins, man who's had a great preseason, and think he might go out here and be extremely disruptive in this first game. And I, of course, didn't know that Zach had been saying something similar, but you wanted to sort of accuse me of piggybacking with Zach Martin. And I'll say this: there's a lot of things I would go to for Zach. I mean, a lot of things in life. I think he's a good young man, but I don't get my football analysis from him.
Well, that's interesting that he made the point a few days before you did. So I was just pointing that out in a humorous way. I didn't know you were so sensitive. I'll be more careful, Snowflake, going forward.
Some of us would question the humor in it. Some of us would like you to take your hand off of your mouth when you talk.
Why are we on Facebook again?
I don't think we've ever gone off Facebook. Okay, we need to as we kind of zero in on this ball game Sunday night. We need to, a couple things. You got an announcement to make, and I want to get that out there. You put this out on Twitter. Would like to have broken this news on this podcast, but you went ahead and put it on Twitter. Predictions for this one. I am going to go with, interestingly, Justin Tuck thought this was going to be a low-scoring ball game, and I think he was kind of trying to take the sharp stick to the Cowboys fans. He predicted 21-17, which I believe he said was the score of that divisional playoff game back in 2007 season. I'm going to go with Cowboys winning this with Zeke 31-28.
High-scoring game.
I think it is a high-scoring game, and I don't. While I do respect the Giants' defense, I'm not blown away. I keep hearing about. And I like the guys you're talking about.
I think they've also, Darren Woodson made the point. Hey, these guys have three corners, assuming Eli Apple is healthy. Their first-round pick from last year. They have three corners who can cover the Cowboys receivers man-to-man, including Cole Beasley, who makes such a difference under ordinary circumstances. So, based on all that...
I don't believe anybody can cover Cole Beasley. I just want to go on the record with that. I think he is maybe... he got to the point last year. I'm serious about this. I know you looked at me sometimes. You're thinking, okay, is he being Mosley?
Mostly Mosley.
He needed to be double teamed sometimes last year. That's how effective he was, and that's why.
Well, are we going to predict Cowboy games every week?
Why wouldn't we? Oh, please don't do this thing with this announcement.
Do what thing?
No, this is like an old thing that
it's not an old.
Anybody thing. That now you're about to be on some of these broadcasts, and I'll let everybody know.
Nothing to do with that.
No, but you're going to be one of these.
Why are you putting us? Why are you
Frito knows what I'm saying. No, I'm just saying these broadcasters like to go, I'm calling this game, so I can't make a prediction. Like the world would fall apart if they made a prediction. I know, but go ahead and give me your prediction, and I'll tell you, and I'll let everybody in on what you're going to be doing.
I'll say the Giants win 27-20.
Oh, ouch, 27-20, and
that means next week one of us is going to be right.
What do you think? What kind of game do you think Zeke has? That does mean that. Do you see him? Going. I think
I think he's going to be highly motivated.
Okay.
He hasn't played a lot in the preseason, which was also the case last year. He's got to develop a sense of timing with two new starting offensive linemen, regardless of who they are. At the right tackle, La'el Collins, and whoever winds up playing left guard. So I think that's a little bit different. I think he'll be effective. Yeah. I don't know that he's going to have a 100-yard game, but I think he'll play well.
I think the only man in the world that can stop Zeke Elliott is sitting out there in Sherman, Texas tonight. Judge Mazant. Ed, I wanted to give you an opportunity to make an announcement. This is another one of your kind of
this
side
is my last
gigs.
show. Oh, wow.
No.
Not that one?
No, you're going to continue on. This will be, and I don't want, as you present this to people, do not treat Doomsday like some sort of side gig. I want you to continue to say to people, hey, I'm podcasting. Be very upfront about
Start
this.
Start paying me that way.
Yeah, Ed. I'm telling you, if you ever find out, you're doing just fine by me. I'll just say that. I want to hear what you have to say about where you're headed, because you're going to be involved in some game broadcasts coming up. Tell us where and how we can hear you.
Right. So I fielded, fortunately, a number of different offers, and there were a couple of things I was interested in. Not all of them worked out because, as I've said before, I remain technically an employee of ESPN. They're honoring my contract, and they've made it very clear that they expect us to honor the contract too. So any opportunities I've had that I've wanted to pursue, I've had to get their permission for. And I'm not going to get into all of the details about how this was accomplished in this particular case, but they did approve of me doing national radio sideline reporting on a handful of games for Westwood One. And that's going to start on Sunday. I am going to be in Denver for Monday Night Football with Kurt Warner will be the game analyst, and Kevin Harlan will be calling the play-by-play, and I'll be working the sidelines. And it's interesting that the only other time I did this was in the final week of the regular season last year. ESPN asked me to do this in addition to my TV And I agreed to do it, and it was really fun being in the bench areas the whole time and on the field. And I did it for a game in Denver between the Raiders and the Broncos. So it was Gary Kubiak's last game. But so overall, here's my thing. Okay, so it looks like I can put the coats and ties away for this season, because my current itinerary is that I'm going to be dedicated, first of all, to the Doomsday Podcast and our weekly broadcast.
First and foremost.
I'm going to do, I think, 5 Westwood One radio broadcasts, including a playoff game and including the Cowboys Thanksgiving Day game. And I will do 2 hits per week for ESPN Radio in Dallas. And pretty much that's it.
Oh, I thought, now you should have gotten me to approve that one. I certainly, is this
a Cumulus problem?
After the way Frito and I were.
Did you know Cumulus also owns Westwood One?
I don't really care. I mean, first of all, but I'll just say this. I really do wish you would have talked to me before you did those ESPN radio hits, because I think I could have gotten you.
As I once said to Dave Smith, the executive sports editor of the Dallas Morning News, when I worked there, and I was doing a few freelance pieces on the side in the off season.
Yeah.
And he didn't really want me to do it. I said, well, then pay me well enough that I don't have to.
Oh my gosh!
So
I know what they pay you. You don't have
that
to.
Same
I know what you make from ESPN. No.
You do not know what I make from ESPN.
I pay you way more than ESPN Radio is going to pay you. And by the way, I had a good visit with Galloway, and that came up. How Dave Smith one time he used to come in on your behalf, and apparently at one point. You had gone in there and said something like, well, Galloway said this.
Even I said, Galloway agrees with me. And Dave Smith said, that's the problem with you, Werner. You think Randy Galloway runs this sports department. And the problem was that Randy did run the sports department. It was Dave who didn't want to see it that way. I'm just kidding. I love Dave Smith. He was great.
Yeah, Dave.
Great paper at the time I was there. I don't know about when you were there.
It was perfect. It was good. It's still good. It's a good. Okay, that was the Doomsday Podcast. We want to continue to encourage you, especially if you're just sampling us early here in the season. You missed some great off-season stuff. All our stuff's archived. You can go back and listen to some great interviews we've had. But sign up on Apple Podcasts, subscribe for free, and then we're on all the different platforms: Stitcher, Google Play, pretty much everything you can think of. Yeah, iHeart, and Spotify, working on Spotify. I'll be on that. A lot of folks kind of like to listen to Spotify, listen to their music on there, and so we'll soon be available to you there. So listen to, and I also wanted to say, too, we've got the another one of your friends, a guy you admire, Brent Musburger's part of the family now. We got the You Are Looking Live podcast to go with the Doomsday Podcast and Tuck Rules. So
what an enterprise.
It is an enterprise, and
you are all in on the podcast.
We are off and running.
You're a podcasting mogul.
I don't know what I am, but I really enjoy it. And even Frito's been very gracious, Frito Nation Productions, in working the odd hours that I request.
But, he, as you mentioned this afternoon, he goes dark at times where you can't reach him. I think he's seeing other podcasters.
I think that.
Without a doubt.
I think he is cheating on us, and mainly with the Allen Chamber of Commerce, it appears. But I want to thank everybody. Who's been a part of this one. Ed, say goodnight.
Good night, Ed.
Who doesn't love a classic chocolate chip cookie? Famous Amos has been making them since the 70s, 1975 to be exact. With semi-sweet chocolate chips and a satisfying crunch, it's everything classic in one bite-sized cookie, and fans couldn't get enough. That's right. You'll find our original recipe, the one you know and love, in every bag of Famous Amos original chocolate chip cookies. Find Famous Amos anywhere you buy your favorite snacks.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.